Hi, and welcome to Get Going Training's DJing with Ableton Live 101. Today we're going to teach you how to DJ with Ableton Live. We'll cover the basics of DJing, what it is a DJ does, the basic facilities of Ableton that we'll use while DJing, the setup of the session window, how to load songs into Ableton for your DJ sets, basic performance tools like EQs and effects, how to manage your song files and arrange your sets in Ableton, and then also how to record your sets. First, let's talk about what it is a DJ actually does. So for those of you who are new to this, a DJ traditionally performs by playing records or CDs, using two turntables or CDJs, and a DJ mixer. The DJ plays a song for the audience on one turntable, and based on how the audience is responding or where he wants to take the music, he'll select the next song to play back and put that record on the other deck. The DJ matches the speed of the new song to the speed of the current song using the turntable's pitch slider to control the speed of playback. To do this, the DJ needs to listen to the next song before the audience hears it. This is called cueing. Now this means that a good DJ mixer needs two separate outputs, one that the audience hears and one that the DJ hears. And the DJ usually uses headphones for cueing, which is why you always see DJs with headphones on. When the new record is playing at the right speed and playing in time, the DJ will use a feature on the mixer known as the CROSSFADER to transition between the two records. The CROSSFADER gradually blends from one channel on the mixer to the other. Songs come from audio files on your disk that are loaded as clips. Clips is just the name that Ableton uses to refer to audio files on your computer. You can browse songs just like you would browse through files on your computer. Load them into Ableton, and then Ableton quickly and easily time stretches the songs to match playback to Ableton's master tempo. Now this is a lot easier than using a turntable's pitch slider to beat match between two records as they're playing, which is what DJs traditionally had to do. You can see Ableton makes the process of DJing much easier having a lot of these features built in. In Ableton, songs come from audio files rather than turntables, and these are loaded into Ableton as clips. Clips is just the name that Ableton uses to process your audio files. You can browse songs just like you browse through files on your computer, and Ableton quickly and easily time stretches the songs to match the playback tempo to the master tempo. This feature is called warping, and we'll talk about this later. That's right, Ableton does the time stretching for you. That is to say, it adjusts the tempo of the track that you're putting on to match the tempo of the track that's playing back automatically. This is a lot easier than beat matching two records using the turntable's pitch slider, as DJs have done for years. Ableton also supports cueing like a DJ mixer would, though you're going to need a sound card or interface with two stereo outs to support this. And you can crossfade between the tracks just like you would on a DJ mixer. We'll discuss all of these features in Ableton in more detail in a minute. So let's go ahead and open up Ableton. There are two main windows in Ableton. The first is the session window, which we're looking at now, and the other is the arrange window. You can switch back and forth between these two by pressing the tab key or via these buttons in the top right-hand corner. There's the arrange window, and here's the session window. For purposes of DJing, we'll definitely be concerned more with the session window, so we'll go ahead and explore this in more detail. There are four sections in the session window. Over on the left, you have a browser, much like a file browser on your computer. You can show or hide this with this triangle in the upper left-hand corner. Let's hide it for now. Down below, you have what's known as the info view. This is a really helpful mouse-over facility that Ableton offers that gives you more detail on any section of the Ableton interface as you're interacting with it. Again, you can show or hide this with the triangle that's adjacent. Let's hide it for now and take a look at our main session view. The main session window consists of vertical strips known as tracks. A track is an individual audio source in Ableton, and there are two different types of tracks, audio tracks and MIDI tracks. An audio track is a sound source that comes from audio files on disk, songs or loops that you might load into Ableton and play back as audio. A MIDI track is used to play instruments such as synths, samplers, and drum machines. Two very different beasts. We'll talk about how you might use MIDI tracks for DJing later on, but primarily we're going to be concerned with audio tracks. So let's go ahead and delete the MIDI track for now. You can delete it by right or option clicking and then selecting delete, or just using the delete key. Now I'm going to create a second audio track. We'll have one audio track for each of our imaginary turntables or source files within Ableton by hitting Command T. You can also create audio tracks through the Create menu. Insert audio track. Let's take a closer look at our audio tracks. Along the vertical strip of an audio track, you see a series of boxes. Each one of these is known as a clip slot. This is where audio files are loaded into for playback in Ableton Live. Again, songs that we want to play back as a DJ are loaded into Ableton as clips. So let's go ahead and do that now. There's two ways to load song files into Ableton as clips. The first is to go into your Finder, grab one of your song files, and drag it into the appropriate clip slot. Now, you can see the square that was on the left of the clip slot turns into a triangle. A familiar triangle that usually means play. Let's go ahead and hit that and see what happens. So let's take a look at the features of the audio track. Along our audio track here, you'll see these rectangles. Each one of these is a clip slot. That is, a slot which a clip or audio file gets loaded into Ableton for playback. There are two ways to load clips into Ableton. The first is to drag and drop the audio file, either a WAV, AIFF, or MP3 file, to the clip slot in the session view from your Finder or Explorer. You'll see Ableton takes a moment to load the file. It analyzes it, and as we'll see, it creates a .asd file in the same directory as the source file. It says the same name as the source file, it just appends .asd. Don't delete these files. These help Ableton load the files faster next time. The second way to load an audio file into Ableton as a clip is via Ableton's browser. Now we closed this earlier, but let's open it back up and take another look. Within the browser, there are a couple of options. The icons with files and little 1, 2, 3 markers are bookmarks for locations in your file system. You can use these just like your file system's browser and store multiple locations as bookmarks. So we'll find the appropriate file and drag it into another clip slot. Again, Ableton loads and analyzes this file. And if we look in the Finder, we'll see it's created another .asd file. Now, within our clip slot, you'll see the little square that was there has changed into a triangle. The triangle indicates play. Square indicates stop, and incidentally, circle indicates record. This motif is used throughout Live, so it's good to recognize. You'll also see this up in the main transport up here. Triangle for play, square for stop, and circle for record. So let's go ahead and start playback of one of the clips we've loaded. Now you can see some of the other features of Ableton's tracks. This section down here, below the row of clip slots, is known as the track status indicator. It tells us some useful info about the clip playing back. It also has another little square that can be used to stop the clip. Down at the bottom of the track, we have the mixer section. The mixer section consists of a fader that controls the volume of the track, a pan pod, which controls balance from left to right, there's also a track activator, which turns the track on or off. These buttons are solo and record. Neither of these are really applicable to DJing, though we'll come back to the solo button when we've enabled queuing mode shortly. Down at the bottom here, we have CROSSFADER assign buttons. We'll discuss this shortly as well. So let's take a look at our master track. Over here on the right, you'll see we have another audio track, another vertical strip, that looks very much like our audio tracks on the other side. except this is the master track to which the output of the other audio tracks are routed. At the top, we have a series of slots that look very much like our clip slots. These are a little bit different. These are called scenes, and we'll talk about these later. Instead of a track status, we have this Stop All Clips button, which does just what it describes. It stops all playing clips. Down at the bottom, we have a set of mixer controls that are similar to our audio tracks, volume and pan. We also have outputs, both for Q and the master out. Now remember, we want two separate stereo outputs from our DJ mixer in Ableton. One for what the audience is hearing, and another for our cueing output. So let's go ahead and set these to something different. I'll go ahead and set the master out to channel 1 and the cue out to channel 2. That means the master output is going to be coming out of the left speaker and the cue out is going to be coming out of the right. Now again, we'd want two separate stereo outputs from your sound card or interface. But since we only have stereo out for playback of this video, I'm going to assign them to the left and right channels just so you can hear what's going on. You'll notice when we've set these to something different, all of a sudden we can toggle the solo button to cue mode. When we do that, you'll see that our S's, which were our solo buttons on the individual tracks, change into these little headphone icons. These little headphone icons mean cue. Selecting cue on a track sends that track's audio output to the cue output, in this case, the right speaker, regardless of whether or not it's playing at the master output. Let's go ahead and see this in action. So I'll start playback of our audio clip in track 1. Now you can hear that's coming out of the left speaker. The left speaker is designated to be our master output, or what the audience would be hearing in a club. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn off the activator on that track so you can't hear it at the master output. Now I'll enable the cue out, and you can hear it's coming out of the right speaker, which is our cue out. Here you can see that this volume affects the volume of our cueing level, but it has no effect on the master output. So I'll re-enable this track, and you can see the same signals coming out both the cue out and the master out. Turning down the cue volume means we're only hearing it coming out of the master output. Turning down the master output means we're only hearing the signal coming out of the cue output. Got it? Let's go ahead and use the Stop All Clips button. Let's look at assigning the crossfader. If we look at the bottom of our master audio track, we'll see this little seesaw icon. The line with the triangle in the middle is used to indicate a crossfader. You'll remember that a crossfader is used to blend two audio channels together. We pull it over to the left, and we hear one of the audio tracks. We pull it over to the right, and it slowly blends into the other. Now, how do we assign individual audio tracks to the crossfader? Well, that's where this crossfader assign section of the individual audio tracks comes into play. A is the left side of the crossfader, and B is the right. So let's see the crossfader in action. To do this, I'll go ahead and initiate playback of the clip on audio track 1. We hear that coming out the master output. I'll pull the crossfader over to the right, over to the left. And sure enough, we hear audio track 1 as expected. As I slide it to the right, you'll hear the sound start to fade out as it fades into audio track 2, which has nothing playing on it. So I pull the crossfader all the way over to the right, and then I'll initiate playback of the clip on audio track 2. Now, as I pull the crossfader back over to the left, we expect to hear the clip on audio track 1 fade in. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that Ableton magically played back these audio clips in time with one another. Now, how did it do this? Remember, Ableton adjusts the clip tempo to the master tempo through a process called warping. We'll take a closer look at the warp feature in a moment, but first, let's talk about the master tempo. Master tempo is the BPM, or beats per minute, that Ableton plays back at. You can see it located up here in the upper left-hand corner of the Ableton interface. You can set the master tempo in one of three ways. You can click and drag up and down to adjust the numerical BPM in the master tempo. You can double-click on it and type in a number. And you can also tap in a rhythm on this tap button, and Ableton will calculate the BPM of the rhythm you're performing. Let's do that now. You can see Ableton calculated that to be about 105 BPM. Tap a little faster rhythm. Now, why would you want to use this tapping feature? If you're DJing into a live performance, such as a band that's playing at a fixed tempo, you can just tap in the rhythm along with the band, and Ableton will calculate the BPM. If you're mixing into another DJ who's playing off a vinyl or another laptop that isn't synchronized to yours, you can again just tap in the rhythm that you're hearing, and Ableton will start to play in sync. Or you can just feel the music at a particular tempo and then tap that in, and that's the tempo that Ableton will play back all your clips at. Lots of uses for that. And once it's set, again, Ableton will adjust all of your clips to this tempo. All right, so now let's really take a closer look at the warping feature. Down below our main session panel, we have the track and clip view panel. You can switch between the two modes by clicking on these tabs down at the bottom. Let's take a look at our first clip. Click on the waveform overview here. This tab switches us over to the clip view. And you can see this view has several parts. If you look over here on the left, you can see we've got the title of the clip. This is taken from the file name that we loaded in. We've got an assignable color that you can use to refer to any number of things. A display color can be used to visually indicate musical style, perhaps key, maybe intensity level, or the part of the evening you want to play the track at. Below that, we've got key signature, and this basically just tells Ableton how to break up the measures that it calculates when it warps. We'll talk about this in just a moment. Moving over to the right, we have the sample pane. Here you can see a little bit of information about the file we loaded in, including sample rate and bit depth. We also see a set of controls for volume and transposition. Now, transpose and detune can be used to control the pitch of a track. Let's demo this really quickly. We'll start playback of the clip. Pretty drastic effect. The detune is just a finer tune of this transposition. In the middle of this sample panel, we have the warp controls. You can see warp on off, the BPM that Ableton has calculated for the clip, divided by 2 and times 2 multiplier to adjust that calculated BPM. This is useful in styles of music that have more rhythmically complex beats. For example, hip-hop, dubstep, drum and bass. These are styles of music that can use rhythmic patterns that will imply either half or double time. So you may have to correct Ableton in that it may calculate a BPM that's either half or double the way that you're thinking about the music. Below this we have warping mode. Let's take a closer look at this because this is very important to your DJing. Now, the best option available in this warp mode is Complex Pro. This is the highest quality time stretching while keeping the key or the pitch of the clip intact. It's also very CPU intensive. So if you get some CPU glitches, dropouts in your audio, you may consider using just Complex instead of Complex Pro. Also pretty good sounding, but not quite as CPU intensive. Below you can see a number of parameters that Ableton uses for the Complex Pro algorithm. If you're interested in these, go ahead and take a look at the manual. There's a really good detailed explanation. The one other mode we're going to concern ourselves with here is repitch. Now this is also an excellent quality tempo adjustment, but changes the pitch of the track, much like a turntable's pitch slider would. Remember that Complex Pro and Complex both keep the pitch of the track intact. A repitch will change it. So for the most part, we'll be using Complex Pro. Let's go ahead and switch that back. Now looking over here at the clip view, we have a horizontal display. You can see a waveform overview here. And then along the top, we have a number of rulers. These numbers along the top are measure markers within that clip. Measures are the musical units of time that Live uses to count playback. Now these are measures within the song itself. Note that Live's overall transport, the measure markers notated up here, doesn't need to match the measure markers in the song. This is just the measure marker location within the clip. Below that, we have several rows for different markers, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But first, let's take a closer look at this waveform display. Now, what's a waveform? A waveform is a visual representation of the amplitude or volume of a sound file over time. Now, this is a graph of the physical motion of the speaker as the sound file plays back, in fact. Now, let's go ahead and zoom in on the waveform. You can do this in three ways. You can either use the plus or minus keys on your keyboard. Also, you can move the mouse up here over the measure ruler, click, and drag up or down. You can also move from left to right. And then finally, you can also place the mouse over the waveform overview down below. And again, dragging up and down zooms in or out. And left or right will find a position within that waveform. Now you see how we zoom in on the waveform, we see smaller gradations in the measure ruler across the top? As we zoom in, we see Ableton dividing these measures into beats. Beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, beat 4. Now, you remember the time signature over here? 4/4 means that there are 4 beats per measure. Now within the waveform, we see certain identifiable musical events. And we call these transients. This usually indicates a spot where a drum hit is. Kick drums in particular are pretty easy to spot. So let's pick a visually identifiable spot. Here around measure 73, we can see we're coming out of a break. Here's a kick drum. Looks like the beat's lining up very closely with the grid. You can see the warp marker that Live has placed before that transient. We'll double click on that beat marker and turn it into a warp marker. Now that locks it to our measure grid. Let's go ahead and find another spot later in the track. Here at measure 177, we have the same thing coming out of a breakdown. Again, very close. Live has done a really good job of warping this track, but just to be sure, we'll go ahead and lock these markers down. Double click on the beat marker, turn it into a warp marker. Now, just as an example, if this were off, say the kick drum was falling before this measure marker, we could click on this and drag it. And Live would stretch the area in between that and the previous beat marker to adjust the duration so that that transient fell where we stretched the beat marker to. We'll find another spot in between and zoom in to make sure that the adjustment we made didn't throw everything else off. Looks pretty good there. And then let's audition a spot later in the track just to make sure it's still lining up with the grid here. Now we can drop in anywhere in this waveform to play back by hovering over this ruler lane here where some more markers are. You'll see that the mouse turns into a speaker. Clicking on that starts playback at that point in the clip. Now what I'm looking at is Live's transport. Watch the measure count there, measures, beats. Counting along with the music, you can see that it's still very closely lined up. So we've done a good job of helping Live warp this. Now let's take a look at our second track. Now you can see there's a long intro before the beat comes in. By default, Ableton starts playing the track at the very beginning. Let's say we want it to start somewhere else, like where the kick drum comes in on this track. Well, There's a newer feature in Ableton that helps us warp tracks like these. First, we'll zoom in on the transient where the beat begins. Double-click to create a beat marker. And then control-click and say set 111 here, which means start creating the measure grid from that beat. Then, we'll control-click again and say warp from here. And that tells Ableton to start the warping from that point. The warping works better when it's got a clear set of transients to work with. Again, just to be sure, we'll skip forward in the track a bit. Find a nice clear point and double check the warping. Zoom in here on 65. You can see it's pretty close. Skip forward a bit again. I'm just picking arbitrary points, intervals throughout the song. Again, pretty close. Looks like it's drifted just a hair, so we'll go ahead and tidy that up. So you can see when we initiate playback by clicking on the Clip Start button here, Ableton starts right where we've dragged the start marker to. Now there's some other markers available in this lane. See this bracketed region? These are the loop points for the clip. Now let's say we wanted to loop the intro of our other track. Click on the clip to view it. Zoom in here at the beginning. You can see our loop markers here. I'll click on the end loop marker and drag this over 8 measures to the beginning of measure 9. You can see how our loop position is set to measure 1. We'll enable looping on the clip. Note that the length is set to an 8 measure loop. And now when we start playback of the clip, you can see live will play that first 8 measures and then loop back around to the beginning. It'll continue to do this until you disable looping by clicking on this button again. Now this is really useful if you want to extend the intro of a track, have a very long gradual mix into or out of a particular section of a song. I'll go ahead and disable looping, and you'll see Ableton will continue playing through the end of that loop and continue on to the rest of the track. You can also set these loop points on the fly while the track is playing. I'll jump ahead into the track by clicking in the marker lane here. Now, when we get to the point where I want to start looping, I'll go ahead and press the Set button here. You'll notice Ableton automatically snaps the loop point to the beginning of that measure. Click to set the end. And you can see Ableton loops right back to the beginning of the loop, starting at the loop point and repeating. Now, you noticed how Ableton set the loop points to exactly the beginning and ending of measures. It made the looping really smooth. Ableton knows how to do this because, 1, we've warped the tracks, meaning that the song's playback will match the master tempo, and 2, because Ableton responds to commands to start playback and set markers only at the start of a new measure. This is called quantizing. This feature is controlled up here in the main transport. See where it says 1 bar? We can change this setting to any of these other available ones, but do so at your own peril. For most DJing where music is in predictable time signatures, we'll leave this set. So let's use this loop over the intro of our other track. We'll go ahead and move our start marker here on our second clip back to the beginning. We'll initiate playback of the loop we just created. Now keep in mind, I set the start point for this first clip way back here at the beginning. So if we want it to start at the beginning of the loop, we've got to move the start marker over. This way, when I hit play, we drop right in at the loop. And as we discussed before, Ableton will just continue looping this section because we've got the loop settings set here in the clip settings. Now, at my leisure, I can go ahead and bring in this second audio clip. So you can see the possibilities as we transition between the looped section of our first audio clip into the main groove of our second song here. Now with just these tools, you can do a lot of DJing. So I know you're ready to go off and practice, but we've really just gotten started. We've got a couple more things to talk about here and then we'll turn you loose. Now we're going to discuss some of the performance tools in Ableton. First, let's talk about EQ. To put an EQ on a track, first we go to the browser and look at Live's devices. You can see we've got some options here. We'll scroll up. Take a look at the EQ3. Now you can see in this drop-down menu there's a number of different preset settings, but we'll just grab the default device by clicking on this header. And what we'll do is we'll drag that onto the track like so. You can see our track view pops up here, changing over from the clip view, and the EQ3 device is inserted on that track. So we've dropped the EQ device onto audio track 1, and it's showing up down here in the track view. Now, for those that are new to EQs, here's what an EQ does. An equalizer adjusts the frequency balance of a track via boosting or cutting in different bands. You can see over here we have a low band, a mid band, and a high band, which is very typical for a DJ mixer style equalizer. Low is our bass frequencies, mid or the mid-range frequencies, the frequencies in the middle, and treble are our high frequencies. And we have some other controls here as well. These buttons are what's commonly known as kills. By deselecting these, we take out all of the low frequencies from the signal, or all of the mid frequencies, or all of the high frequencies. Let's hear that in action. So you can see, by turning the low gain down, we gradually roll off the low frequencies. Or we can kill the low frequencies altogether. Pretty useful tool there. There's a kill for the high frequencies. Or a gradual roll off. Now, we also have control over where the filter roll-off is set. So we can kill the high frequencies and then play with the filter, as so. Another pretty common DJ effect. Now, you see here we have a filter roll-off for the low frequencies, which behaves much the same way, for the high frequencies. And then we have this setting in the middle, which is 24 or 48, which controls the steepness of those two filters. Basically, each one of these has a slightly different sound, and you can experiment to figure out which one suits your music best. So let's look at some of the other common insert effects. Try out the flanger here. Again, we can drag that either up into the track strip in our session view, or right down here onto the track view. You can enable or disable these devices by clicking on this on-off button. Each one has one. So we'll disable the EQ for now and just leave the flanger enabled. See, the flanger has a number of different controls that change the sound. And then by moving this dot around the screen here, it changes some of the parameters, the delay time and feedback. See how that might come in handy? Let's take a look at the overdrive. Pretty harsh distortion effect. Now keep in mind you can change the order of these, perhaps putting an EQ after your overdrive. One more we want to take a look at here, the auto filter. This filter is designed very much like the filters on our EQs. However, you can also set it to oscillate or respond to the shape of the music that's playing. Changing the shape of the filter, much in the same way that the 24 or 48 setting on the EQ changes the steepness. Say you want me now. Say you want me later. Say you want me now. Say you want me later. Say you want me now. You can say the filter also can change the panning. Works great with this breakdown section. A world of possibilities available with Live's built-in devices. Now, as you can see, there's a huge number here. I've showed you some of the more popular ones, particularly for DJing applications, but there's enough that you'll want to take some time to explore and get to know them. Using these, you can really kind of develop your own sound and inject some personality and uniqueness to your DJing style. So take the time to get to know those. Now, when we insert these effects on our tracks, these are applied to just the audio track that we were playing. Our other audio track here, as you'll notice, still plays back cleanly. If we wanted to apply an EQ to this track, we would do it exactly the same way. We'd take one of Live's devices, drag it onto that audio track, and then we'd have the same degree of control we did with the other one. Now there's one more really powerful insert effect that I'd love to talk about. It's called the beat repeat, and we use it to loop sections of our tracks on the fly. Now you'll remember we already learned one method of doing this, using the markers within a clip, but this is an insert effect option that can be used to replicate the same thing with some additional features. So let's check it out now. Now, I'll grab the beat repeat from the Live devices, drag it into our insert chain. I've put it at the beginning, meaning I want it to loop the direct source clip as opposed to the output of all the additional effects. Now you can see this has a number of features. To set it up for looping, DJ style, we set the mode to insert versus mix. Repeat, turn the chance down to 0 so the randomization function is off. And then set the grid to whatever duration we want to repeat. For now, let's set it to a bar. So let's see the beat repeat in action. Beat repeat is triggered when the plugin is on. So we'll disable it for now, and then go ahead and start playback of our clip at an interesting section. Here comes the section I want to loop. Now you can see beat repeat is just looping the bar that I enabled the plugin on. I can change the grid, which changes the length of the repeat. I can play with these filters. This works much the same way as the auto filter does.
Stay warm now. Stay warm later. And if you can't stand, can't stand, can't stand, can't stand ever. And if you can't stand, can't stand, can't stand, can't stand, oh, can't stand, can't
Now, one important thing to notice is that beat repeat is taking over playback of the track. It's stealing the listener's attention from the original source clip, so you'll lose your place in the song. Now, this is really useful in some applications and really disruptive in others, as we heard. But you can see the power of the plugin. One popular use for this is to loop a particular section, say a bar, and then mix into another track rather quickly, so you don't have to rejoin the original track. Pretty cool. So while there's a large number of audio insert devices available within Live, you'll probably find yourself gravitating towards the same 4 or 5 for each track when you're DJing. I've got some of my favorites inserted here already. Now, every time you create a new audio track or open Live to create a new session for DJing, instead of having to drag these same 4 or 5 devices onto each individual track, Live enables you to bundle them together into what's known as an audio effect rack. An audio effect rack is located in our list of Live devices over here. It looks just like any other insert. However, what it actually is a bundle of other insert devices. Now you can see here there's a number of presets, each of which contains a particular preset chain of insert devices. But we're going to create our own. So we'll go ahead and just grab the default audio effect rack from our list of devices. Drop it into the beginning of our insert chain. And you can see here there's a prompt. Drop audio effects here. So we'll do as we're told. Drag the beat repeat, the flanger, the overdrive, our EQ3, and the auto filter into this container that's called an audio effect rack. Now, over here on the left, you'll see there's a button, has a little knob in it, that springs open this panel, which is known as the macro panel. Now, a macro is just a fancy term for a remote control. So what we're going to do is we're going to select controls within our inserts and use these macro knobs as remote controls for those. So instead of having to sift through and select one control on each of perhaps 4 or 5 different devices, we can just use this macro panel as one big remote control for all of the contained inserts effects. Hence the term audio effect rack. So what should we select? We'll click map mode, which is how we do the assignment. Click on the controller we want to assign. Let's go ahead and choose the on-off button for the beat repeat. Select map on the selected knob. And you can see this is now labeled device on, which is the title of that controller from beat repeat. Let's go ahead and do a few more. Perhaps taking the grid, mapping it to macro 2. We'll take the flanger on off, map that to 3. Maybe our overdrive on off for macro 4. Oops, missed the button there. And then let's go ahead and map our EQ, low, mid, and highs. And finally, we'll select the auto filter frequency. Turn map mode off, and you can see our device on enables or disables beat repeat. You can see the grid. Now remote controls the grid control within beat repeat. We've got device on for our flanger, device on for our overdrive, control of low, mid, and high EQs. Set those to 0 before we start playing. Make sure the EQ is back on. We turned it off while we were experimenting with the inserts. Turn the auto filter on as well. Put the frequency all the way up so it's only minimally affecting the sound. Now we can collapse down all of our contained insert effects, so we just have this one very simple interface. Then, when we enable playback on our track, we have this one simple interface to control all of those features. Now, if we want to save this, we can just click this little disk icon here. It puts our audio effect rack into the audio effects rack preset list, and we can rename it. That way, we can simply recreate the same effects chain, complete with the macro controls, on any other track we like. When we put an EQ or other insert effects on our tracks, the effect is applied to just that track. There are some sorts of effects, however, that we want to share between tracks. These are called send effects. Now, if we go over to the right side of our session pane and click on these S and R buttons in the options, you see we pop up the sends on our individual audio tracks and these two return channels over here by the master track. Now, the sends from the individual audio tracks feed these return channels. Send A feeds return A. The output of return A is in turn sent to the master channel, as you can see here in the IOs. The two most common send effects are delay and reverb. Let's take a look at a reverb effect. I'll go over here to our device browser, go into our reverbs, pick out one of our favorite presets. I like the long tail reverb. And I drag that over here onto return channel A. Now you can see we have a track view for this return track as well. And the long tail reverb is inserted just like an insert effect would be, except it's on the return. What this means is the original audio track is unprocessed and continues to be sent to the master without affecting our send effect, until we turn up the send from that channel. Then we'll see the audio get sent to that return channel, processed through the reverb, and the output of that is sent to our master. Now for send effects, you'll always want to make sure the output of the effect, here controlled by the dry-wet dial, is set to 100% wet. What that means is the output of the reverb is just the reverb and none of the dry, unaffected signal. Let's see this in action. We'll start playback of our clip. Turn up the send to channel A. You can hear the reverb effect acting on the audio track. Now, looking at this reverb device, you'll see there's a large number of controls. The workings of reverbs is a large topic in and of itself, so we're not going to go into detail. There's some details in the live manual and lots of information out there for you to look at if you're interested in the effects of these. It's worth taking some time to get to know what the options do. However, there are also a large number of pretty good presets available within the live devices. If you're just getting started, I'd suggest starting with one of those presets, finding a sound you like, and then tweaking it from there. Now, we adjusted this dry-wet earlier. If you're clever, you will have deduced that we can actually use this as an insert effect as well. So let's see that in action just by way of comparison. I'll go ahead and take this device, drag it over onto audio track 2, start playback on just that track. And as I affect the dry-wet balance, you can reshift back to the dry signal and just the reverb. So there may be occasions where you want to use a reverb as an insert effect as well. Traditionally, however, these are used as send effects. Another popular send effect is delay, also known as echo, which creates a repeat or echo of the source. Let's load a delay onto our other send-return pair. Again, back to our live devices. We'll go to simple delay. Select a quarter note delay, drag that into return channel B, and see how the device pops up here in return B's track view. Now again, we've got a dry-wet balance. Since this is a send effect, we'll set that to 100% wet. So we'll just get the output of the delay effect and not the original signal, which will already be passing from audio channel 2 to the master output. Using the send on channel B, as we turn down the send, you can see that the signal from the quarter note delay eventually dies out. Another popular send effect is delay, which is also known as echo. This creates a repeat or echo of the source signal. Let's load a delay on our other send-return pair and check out what it does. Go back to Live's audio devices. Go down to simple delay. I'm going to choose a quarter note delay. It's a delay that's in time with each beat of the music. Drag it over into return B. And you'll see again we have a dry-wet signal on this. Since we're using it as a send effect, we'll click that to 100% wet. Just the delayed signal, none of the dry, since that's still making it from our audio track directly to the master fader. Go ahead and restart playback of our clip on channel 2. Turning up send B. You can hear the effect. As you turn up the feedback, the number of repeats on the delay increases. You can see as the feedback got turned up, the number of repeats increased. So hear the trail of the delay fading out long after the signal has been removed. Let's talk about how to trigger samples in Live. Live's basic package includes a basic sampler, a device called Simpler. To load a Simpler device, first we want to create a MIDI track. Let's go to the Create menu and select Insert MIDI Track. Then we'll go to Live's device browser, and under the Instruments folder, we find the Simpler device. You can drag this onto the MIDI track, just like we would an insert effect on an audio track. And you can see the device appears here in the track view. The Simpler device has a number of controls, but there's this big panel here that prompts you to drop a sample here. Let's go to our browser, pick out a sample, and drag it into the location. You'll see Live loads up the sample, and now, by playing a key on our MIDI keyboard, we can trigger the sample within Live. Maybe we want to add some effects to that. Maybe some reverb for that one. Let's go ahead and hear that in time with one of our audio tracks. See how that would be useful. Keep in mind you can load all sorts of audio samples into the Simpler device. They could be drum hits, explosions, swells, vocal samples, any number of things. So be creative here. Let's take a look at how to set up a MIDI controller to control some of Live's other features. Now, I've got a MIDI controller connected to Live. It's an old Novation Remote 25 that has a number of sliders and knobs that we can assign to any number of features within Live. And assigning them couldn't be any easier. We simply go up to the MIDI button here in the upper right-hand corner of Live's interface, click on it, and you see Live's interface changes. We have this new panel that pops up over on the left, and a purple overlay on a lot of the controls in the session window. Here's how we assign an individual MIDI controller, like a knob, to a control within Live. I'll go to the volume fader on audio track 1, click on the purple overlay on the box, and simply move the controller on my keyboard. You can see this number pops up along with an entry in this panel over here. What this is a mapping between the control signal sent from the MIDI keyboard and the controller in Live. I'm going to go ahead and assign another fader to the volume control on channel 2. I can navigate around and select the EQ, set a number of features on the EQ, including the low, mid, and high gains, the kills, and the high filter. Now I'll go ahead and do this for the other audio channel as well. I'll also assign the CROSSFADER. Once I've got all of the controllers assigned that I want, I simply go up here and disengage this MIDI assign control. Now that we've assigned a bunch of controllers to control Live's features, let's go ahead and see some of these in action. I'll go ahead and start playback on one of my audio clips. Adjust the filters. And I'll go ahead and start the audio on track 2. Now let's talk about how to divide your songs up into sections and have each section be an individual clip. Why might you want to do this? Well, say there's an intro or breakdown section within a song that you want to use as a mixing tool. Perhaps as a loop you're mixing into or out of, or a sound effect or a motif you want to bring in or out at different sections of your set. It's a little bit cumbersome to load the entire song into Ableton, find the appropriate section each time, loop it, and then use that all on the fly while you're playing. What if we could do that all in advance and just load the appropriate clip in when we wanted it? Well, we'll talk about how to accomplish that. First, we're going to create a duplicate of one of the audio clips we've been using. Let's use this one that we've been using in audio track 1. We'll option click on it, drag down to an empty clip slot. I'll rename it here in the clip view. We'll call it Do You Intro. Now we'll go in to the waveform overview. We'll look all the way at the end where we have what is an end marker. We talked about the start marker, but there's also a corresponding end marker for the clip. That's where Ableton would end playback if left to its own devices. We'll drag that to measure 17. So now we've got the clip starting at measure 1 and going to measure 17, which incidentally is where the bass comes in. Now, to take this section and make it into its own clip, we can click on that measure, select everything between measure 1 and measure 17, right or control click on it, which pops up this additional context menu, and then select Crop Sample. So what have we just done? We've taken just that section of the song and created a separate audio clip that just contains that. None of the rest of the song is even there anymore. We'll set that to loop. Hit play. And what we'll see is we've just effectively looped that intro in its own clip. Now what Ableton has done is it's saved a copy of this with a new name that we can go find in the file browser and load in as necessary. I'll show you that in just a second, but let's just check and see what we've done here. Great, exactly what we wanted. We've created an intro that we can extend as long as we want to. What other sections of the song might we want to use as an individual clip? Well, perhaps we'll take a section of the breakdown. So go back up to our original audio clip, option click and drag down to an empty clip slot, rename. We'll go and find the appropriate section here. We'll set our loop markers just to check and see what it's going to sound like. Sounds like a useful little section. We'll take the start and end markers and use those to define the section. Select the appropriate area, control click, again select Crop Sample. And we'll see again, we've created just that section of the song that we want. Now there are all sorts of possibilities here. We could even take that intro, pull it over, and play that clip at the same time as the breakdown. Basically, by taking these two sections of the song and using them as their own individual clips, we've given ourselves the ability to kind of remix the track on the fly. We can use these sections to mix into other tracks, or we can use another section of the song as another layer over top of the original track itself. The possibilities are pretty much endless. So again, experiment, be creative, and add your own style and flair to your DJing. So you've learned some of the basic tools of DJing. You've learned how to use your insert and send effects and to control live via your MIDI controller. You've broken up some of your songs into sections that you can load as clips to allow you to do some remixing on the fly. Now, let's say you've got that all going. You've created a great set and you're ready to record it. How do you do that within Live? Well, it's pretty simple actually. You go up to the master transport, you hit record, and start playing. So I'll go ahead and give you a quick demonstration so you can see how Live records your sets, because it's not perhaps what you'd expect. So we just recorded a quick mix. What was it that Live was recording? It wasn't our audio, it was actually how we were interfacing with the Live controls. Now, to see what Live recorded, we need to go over to the arrangement view. We'll click on the other button here in the upper right-hand corner of the session pane, or we could just hit Tab to go back and forth between the two, you'll recall. And what do we see? Well, Live has mapped out the individual clips that we played. You can see our intro section here that we used. It mapped out how we were interacting with the volume control. You can also see the moves that we made with the EQs. Now this is all well and good, except we don't have any audio here. So how do we convert this to audio? Well, it's simple. We go up to Live's main menu, select File, and then Export Audio and Video. Now what we're worried about is the audio output, obviously. So we select the appropriate file type, either WAV or AIFF, mono or stereo. We definitely want stereo out for DJ mixing. Sample rate, 44.1 kilohertz, 16-bit standard CD rate. Create analysis file, not necessary. That would be an ASD file that we'd use to re-import the output of our DJ mix back into Live. We're probably going to burn this as a CD or convert it to MP3 in iTunes, so we don't need this analysis file. we can select the rendered track or the output that Live is recording the audio from. Most of the time you'll want the master track. We'll leave normalizing and render as loop off. Hit OK. Live gives us the option of where to save the file. And then very quickly renders it to disk. Simple. We load this into iTunes and we've got our DJ mix. Now, let's go back and look at the arrangement view. All of this data that Live saved is actually data you can interact with. Let's say we wanted to bring in this section more smoothly. We can zoom in. We can select a section, smooth it out. We can also extend or change the loop we're playing in a particular section. There's a number of options here. So for whatever reason, your mixing was sloppy, or you just didn't like a move you made, you can go back into the arrangement view and actually correct it. Or you can just go back and play the entire set again. We'll talk more about the arrangement view in other chapters. So here's yet another way of looping while you're DJing in Live. In this method, we actually create a new clip for the loop so we can reuse it later in our set or in some other performance down the road. In addition to looping, this will demonstrate a new and different way to use Ableton's routing that we'll use later on. To set this up, we create a new track, Command T. We'll go ahead and rename the track. Loops. In our I/O settings, we'll select from channel 2. So the input to this track will be coming from the output of audio channel 2, regardless of where this is being sent. Now we can record enable the track, and then we'll go ahead and pull the volume down since we're already getting the output from channel 2 here. Now you see how when we record enabled the track, our play stop buttons in the clip slots turned into these little circles. These little circles mean we can record into these clip slots. So let's go ahead and do that. Go ahead and select a section of the song here. You can see we're receiving audio from channel 2. And then at the appropriate moment, I'll click to start recording in this clip slot. Grab that transition. Stop playback. Put the volume of this guy back up. And let's see what we've got. Pretty useful little tool. So let's rename it and save it for later. Renamed it. I can drag it over here to the file browser, and you can see Ableton goes ahead and creates a new project just for that clip. So I can drag it in and use it anywhere, either in this session or another. So how do we integrate this into our DJing? Well, one way is to keep the track volume down and the loop track in record, like we just did. Then we trigger the starting and stopping recording either via the buttons or via a MIDI controller. Similarly, we can map a knob or fader on a MIDI controller to the track's volume to blend the loop in where we want it to. If we've got our queuing set up, we can simply cue the track and hear the loop against what we're already playing, perhaps something on track 1, and blend it in that way. Alternately, we can leave the track volume up, assign this track to one side of the crossfader, and move the crossfader over to the other side. Then, we can start playback again, and just use the crossfader to blend the loop in. A couple of options there using our new routing. So here's yet another way to use this routing. We can set the audio output from track 2 to sends only, meaning no signal gets sent to the master fader, just to the sends from the track. However, we're sourcing our input to our record track here from channel 2, and we've got it in record enable, meaning we'll hear what plays through it. So let's go ahead and hear that. We'll slide the crossfader over to side B, start playback of our clip here. And you can see what we're hearing at the output of our record track is actually just our input from channel 2. Now let's go ahead and change our quantization to half bar, record a quick loop here. And now we can trigger this loop on the fly, and it is played instead of what's coming through on audio channel 2. Yet another possibility for using that new routing. Now keep in mind, you can put all sorts of insert effects on this channel as well, and therefore affect the sound of the loops or our original audio channel. So in this regard, this is actually more of a through track than a loops track. It allows us to record our individual loops, but we can also process our source channel. So let's go ahead and rename it to through. Now, once we've got this set up, we can also use this track to manipulate parameters of the inserts we put on the track. But in order to do this, we need to learn about a new feature called clip automation that we haven't talked about yet. So let's take a look at that now. Now to really explore the power of this, let's add an insert to our through track. We'll go over here to the Devices menu. We'll grab our DJ Faves audio effects rack, deposit that on our through track, and then going back over to our clip properties, checking out the envelopes, we can see that we have the option to select either the whole audio effect rack as a device or any of the contained inserts. So let's go ahead and select the audio effect rack as a whole, since we know that consolidates a bunch of the controls we want to use. Then we'll select the frequency, which is the frequency of our auto filter. So we can hear what it sounds like unaffected there. And then we can draw in a couple of points in our line here that will create a nice little filter sweep. Pretty cool effect. So now, anytime we trigger this loop, that effect is played back along with it. Meaning the envelopes of our insert effects are remote controlled by our clip envelopes that we've drawn out here. So there's another way we can use this. We can use the envelope that we've drawn for that insert effect without actually playing back the clip. Now to do that, let's go ahead and create a copy of this loop. We'll name it filter sweep. And we'll go ahead and disable this on our original loop. So now we've got the automation for the filter sweep. The next thing we're going to do is put this track in monitor mode, meaning the track will pass whatever is at the input to the output without adding any additional audio. So I can play back this loop, but we won't hear anything, because what the track is configured to do is simply pass the input from our source track through this channel without adding any audio. What's cool is that our envelope automation of the insert effects still works. So when I engage this, we'll see the filter sweep happen even though no audio is being played from the clip. Pretty cool effect. So it really doesn't matter what audio we have in this filter sweep because we're not hearing it anyway. What we're doing is just passing the audio from the source and affecting it with our inserts. This is called a dummy clip, for obvious reasons. No audio is played back, it's just used to automate parameters.